Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Autism Workshop. My name's Ashley and I'll be taking over from Sophie to present this part. I'm one of the nurses here that works in the CAMS team, and we'll be discussing today around or covering areas such as behaviours that challenge, strategies that can help with behaviours, and as well as strategies or different ways we can tell a child, or you as a parent can tell a child about their diagnosis. So first we will be covering behaviour and arousal. So we'll be covering what a challenging behaviour is, different strategies that we can use to counteract behaviours, what to look out for, as well as the arousal curve and the patterns of arousal as well. Firstly, I'd like to draw your attention to this diagram of the sieve and the funnel. So if you look at the sieve, this represents a neurotypical person's brain, so this means just a person without autism and its ability to cope and manage with different situations and events throughout the day. The funnel represents a person with autism and their brain and its ability to cope and manage with day-to-day situations. The sand represents minor tasks and challenges, and the rocks and stones represent big or unexpected or different events that we don't see day to day. As you can see, the sieve is able to allow the sand to come through regardless of how many rocks or stones there. So this means, or it represents, that a neurotypical person is able to cope and manage with a situation regardless of how many difficult tasks that they have to do or how many obstacles get in the way. However, when we look at the funnel, that's totally different. So for the funnel, it just takes one rock or one stone and it's enough to stop the sand from coming through entirely. So this represents that people with autism are more often than not struggle with larger unexpected events, as they're unable to cope with it, they're unable to process it, or they're unable to predict that it's actually going to happen in the first place. And in turn, that makes them feel a little bit overwhelmed, and more often than not, because they're feeling overwhelmed and they don't know how to deal with the situation or deal with this event, they will display in some way some sort of challenging behaviour. So when we think of possible stones and pebbles, we could look at a child and the child's perspective of things, of what's going on around them or what's happening in the day-to-day life and the different feelings that they have. So generally, from the perspective of a child with autism spectrum condition, you would find that it's, I just want to stay at home, the noises might be too loud, they might find the situation confusing, they don't know what they're doing next, they get very bad anxiety over unknown situations, they don't understand why people are laughing, don't understand why people are interested in these sorts of things, they don't know why people find them annoying or a little bit difficult to deal with and that sort of thing. So it's understanding from their perspective why that particular task or why that particular situation or event is difficult for them to deal with. And once we can understand that, we can try and put strategies in place to help them cope or to lessen the trigger or lessen the impact that the situation or event has on them. Challenge behaviour or behaviours that challenge are different to normal behaviours. So when we class something as a behaviour that challenges or a challenging behaviour, we are looking at the intensity of that behaviour, the frequency of that behaviour, as well as the impact of that behaviour on the ability for that child to access the community as well. So we know behaviour is one of the main ways we communicate with each other. So challenge behaviour is more likely to occur when somebody finds it hard to understand what other people are saying to them, or when they find it hard to tell somebody else how they're feeling or what they want. It is important to note that nobody displays challenging behaviour because they want to. We display challenging behaviour because we do not know how else to communicate our feelings or our thoughts, okay? When we look at behaviour, or especially challenging behaviour, we want to look at the function of that behaviour, so the main reasons or causes for that behaviour. And when we talk about functions, we talk about 4 or 5 different functions that we know of. So the first function could be tangible, so that's the child is trying to gain access to something that they want. Generally, you find that behaviours happen if the child is being told no. So you find that they may, for example, throw a tantrum or scream loudly or start hitting out and throwing objects, that sort of thing. The second function is escape. So escape and avoidance. So they don't want to do something, so they don't want to do homework, or they don't want to tidy up the room, or they don't want to put the dishes away, that sort of thing. So generally you find that the behaviour happens when they're told to do something that they don't want to do, or generally that is expected of them to do a particular thing at school, and you find that these behaviours happen. So you tend to find the behaviours maybe yelling or hiding, or arguing, or ripping up homework, or throwing homework away, or hiding and avoiding tasks. The next function is attention. So they want your attention, or they want somebody else's attention. So they may be bored, or they may feel like they're a bit lonely, or they may just, because you're there, they may just want your attention, okay? So you find that behaviours happen, or examples of behaviours could be yelling when you're on the phone, interrupting and intruding on your conversations, running around, or doing behaviour that they know forces your attention on them. So that could be throwing things, it could be hitting out, it could be kicking, that sort of thing, just so the behaviour is extreme enough to get your attention. Lastly, we could look at the sensory side of things. So our senses are a good, or one of the reasons why we behave in a way, because it's hard to communicate how different things feel. So it could be sensory in a way that this particular thing feels good. So it feels good if I rock, or I flap my hands, or if I start scratching or picking at my skin, that sort of thing. So some children find that really, really feels good. Other things, it could be that it feels bad. So I am doing this particular behaviour because I don't like the way I'm feeling at this moment in time, and I want to change that. This diagram is what is known as either an emotional arousal curve or a behaviour escalation curve, okay? So when we look at the baseline, we're looking at how the child feels. So we want, in this particular phase, for the child to be as happy and as calm as possible, okay? When we move into the escalation phase, that means that there's a trigger or a situation that's happened that it has made your child feel distressed or feel a little bit agitated. So we're moving up the curve, and we're seeing a rise or an increase in the behaviour. So we may notice that they will pace, the face may go red, they may be shouting, screaming, stamp the foot, slamming the doors, that sort of thing. So there's an escalation in behaviour. When we reach the crisis phase, it means that the behaviour is at crisis point. Brain is shut off, where the child is relying on instinct alone, so the fight or freeze response, to be able to manage and deal with the situation at that current moment in time. So you may find that when they reach the stage, it's a lot of screaming, kicking, punching, hitting out, that sort of thing. Then after the behaviour has happened, we move into the recovery phase. The recovery phase is referring to how does the child calm down, what is their pattern, or what do they like to do to help them calm down so that they can return to the baseline phase, okay? If we look at the bottom graph now, so we notice, or the bottom graph actually represents the ability, or someone's ability to process information and reason with what's going on around them. We find that as our emotional arousal or as our behaviour increases, our ability to process information and able to reason with what's going on lessons. So as we reach crisis phase, we know that our brain has shut off, it's not working, it's relying on instinct alone, and therefore our ability to process information, to process what people are saying around us, has just it's just not there, it's just non-existent. So we have to recognise that as the behaviour is happening, or as the behaviour increases, your child's ability to understand and process the information and understand what you're saying to them lessens. We know that managing distress is difficult, but it can also be difficult for someone with autism to link behaviour to triggers and consequences. So we know that they may not recognise that a particular situation can trigger their behaviour, or they may not recognise that the behaviour that they do, so the kicking, the hitting, the throwing objects, or whatever the behaviour is, has a consequence. So trying to manage the behaviour, manage the distress, and manage the outcome and the consequence of that behaviour, especially for a child with autism, it can be really difficult. What we can do, however, is try and help them understand their emotions and understand that there is a way and means to behave in a more appropriate context. So this includes recognising what each stage looks like for your child. So what do they look like in baseline stage, and what do they look like in the escalation phase, or the crisis phase, or the recovery phase? What do they like doing, or what do they say? So it's about learning what their behaviour is like in each stage to know how we can counteract that and how we can manage that. So recognising which stage of behaviour it is within that behaviour curve, or that emotional arousal curve for your child, is helpful because it helps you know where they are, their ability to process that information at that time, and how we can best put strategies in place to support them. So going back to the emotional arousal curve, or the behaviour escalation curve, it's obviously split into 4 different sections. So if you look at the baseline phase, or the baseline section, as I said before, this is the section where your child is presenting at their calmest or their happiness. So in this section, what we want to do is to identify and reduce any possible triggers that may trigger challenging behaviour. We also want to, in this stage, teach new skills and new coping strategies to be able to cope with any of these unexpected triggers, unexpected situations, anything that may have a potential or maybe linked to your child's challenging behaviour. As also at this time, it's the best time to gently challenge your child. So by introducing new things, new activities, new food, maybe trying new transitions out, that sort of thing. But remember that even in this stage, even at their calmest, children with autism may still have very high levels of anxiety at their baseline stage, and that we have to remember this when we're trying to teach them new skills, or trying to gently challenge them. And maybe at this stage it's about trying to find coping strategies to cope with this anxiety and counteract the anxiety. The escalation phase, obviously this is when the triggers happened and the child is starting to become a little bit more stressed or distressed, or even a little bit agitated. So what we do in this section is we become familiar with the early warning signs. So when we say, or when we mention early warning signs, what we are looking for is the child's presentation before the behaviour starts. So we're looking at things such as going red in the face, and starting a pace. They may start to hide away in the bedroom or try to seek out their own space without anybody. We're trying to look at any potential repetitive behaviours, such as hand flapping, or jumping up and down, or other things that are a warning that a behaviour is about to happen. Also in this stage, we want to reduce triggers when possible. So if we notice that actually this trigger's just happened, but we see another trigger on the in the horizon, for example, we try and reduce that trigger as possible. We also want to support and encourage children to use their coping strategies. So to promote them using certain breathing techniques, or to use grounding techniques or anything like that that helps them cope with their emotions, their anxiety, and try to reduce the behaviour. We also, as parents in this stage, we also want to use distractions, or to recommend calming activities, so having time on the Xbox or the computer or the PlayStation, or if they find arts and crafts calming, drawing or colouring it in, they might want to go for a walk, that sort of thing. So using anything to distract them from that trigger, from that behaviour, or anything that we know that can calm them down. We also, as parents, want to reduce the demands on the child. So if there's loads of demands, or if there's loads of expectations on that child around that time, whether it's at school or doing work at home or doing chores or whatever, we want to reduce that. So we want to just lessen the demand on that person, and also to reduce the interaction between yourselves as well, if we're starting to get a little bit agitated and a little bit more stressed, because it'll give them time to help them process that, because it takes them a little bit longer due to the autism. It is at this time that is not the time to introduce or practice new skills. It's not the time to have any transitions. It's not the time to enforce anything that we know may cause stress or distress or agitation for your child. So crisis phase, obviously this, as I mentioned before, this is the time where your child is no longer able to cope, the brain shut off, and they're relying on instinct alone, okay? So what we do in this stage is to ensure that the child is safe, that the environment is safe, that there's nothing around them that they could use to harm themselves or other people, or break, or cause any damage. We also want to remember that in this stage that the child's ability to think clearly and reason is at their poorest. So we do not want to try and problem solve or rationalise, or even try to calm the child down at this stage, because actually it could escalate or prolong the crisis and the behaviour. And what you really need to do is just give them time and space to be able to reduce the arousal, reduce the goal-ons in the environment, and try and help them stop becoming so overwhelmed. While we also want to give them space and to reduce the interaction between yourselves, is to avoid confrontation as well, because actually if there is a confrontation, then you'll find that obviously this also has a way of escalating or prolonging the crisis. Okay, again, we want to reduce the damage, reduce the damage done. We want to reduce the demands on the child, and we also want to keep the language really simple. So now and next, and now we're going to deal with this behaviour. Next, we're going to go on and have some time on the computer, and keeping it really simple so that they're able to process it a little bit better, because their ability to think and to reason is at their lowest. And remember, as parents, just to remain calm, if you can, but just to remain calm, because if you remain calm, then your child realises that, and then that will help with them calm down as well. So when a child's at crisis phase and they're displaying this behaviour, you often hear people or parents refer to that as a meltdown. So this is a quote from a child who was asked to describe what a meltdown feels like. So they said that it's a bit like wanting to vomit and knowing that you will feel ill until you actually throw up. You've got to get it out of your system and get it done with in order to feel better by getting it out of your system and by displaying that behaviour. Which is a really interesting take on it, I think, because we know that as adults and as parents, when we get agitated, we do find that we do display behaviours such as slamming doors or shouting or getting a little bit more snappy, because obviously we have that feeling that we're trying to communicate that we are angry and a bit agitated ourselves, but we don't want to communicate that, and our behaviour is doing that for us. But actually sometimes we do need to get it out of our system, so we do need to slam doors, and we do need to to shout and scream a little bit, because actually it helps us feel better. So recognising that sometimes children with autism may need these meltdowns in order to help them feel better. So sometimes it's about acknowledging that although we're trying to help or trying to reduce these behaviours, that actually sometimes it is going to happen because it's what they need to do to feel better. So moving on from the crisis stage into the recovery phase now. So remember, this is when the behaviour has stopped and your child is now beginning to show signs of calming down. They're starting to process information a little bit more, and they're starting to feel a little bit more like the normal selves. So in this stage, it's just remembering that things could easily escalate again. So it's easier to go back to the top of the arousal curve than it is going back down to the bottom to baseline. So during this phase, what we want to do as parents or as adults is to support your child to engage in the appropriate calming strategies. So whether that is time alone in the room, or having a drink, or going for a walk, or whatever your child prefers, is being able to allow them to engage in that activity. So we also want to, if appropriate, continue to give them time and space to reduce their arousal and reduce their behaviour and start to calm down and become a little bit more like themselves and reach baseline again. We also want to avoid confrontation and keep demands low, because as I've said before, things could really easily escalate again back up to the crisis phase. When they've reached baseline again, and when we've supported them to reach baseline again and support them to become a little bit more calmer, it could be useful to use visual aids to support reflection around the incident, around the behaviour, what's caused it and why did they behave that way, so that we can support their learning and actually support putting strategies in place to stop this from happening again in the future. So now we move on to the next part of the workshop, which is how to help. So strategies that we can use to help manage challenging behaviours or behaviours that challenge. One strategy that we can use to help manage challenging behaviour are the use of visual resources. So visual resources can help make abstract language, complex sentences, or unusual situations more understandable for young people. It can also be useful when the young person is feeling particularly anxious, and their level or their ability to process information is reduced because of that anxiety. Visual resources can really help with routines and transitions and unexpected changes, because it's able to communicate more effectively than what spoken language can be, especially if the child with autism is particularly anxious. Visual resources can also help when we're teaching new skills. We can also provide them across a range of settings, so they can be used at home and at school to provide consistency. We can tailor visual resources to the individual and to the child, and they can be useful for any age or ability and are easily accessible for young children with autism. Examples of visual aids or resources that can be used around routine change and timings could be the use of a visual timetable or a visual planner, so that children are aware of what they're doing throughout the day. We can use it to plan out a particular routine, like a morning routine or a nighttime routine, so the child knows what to expect. We can also use what's known as a now and next board, so we're able to put visual aids in place of activities. So now you could have a picture of a computer, where now you can spend time on the computer. Next you can have a picture of a plate or some food. Next we're going to have lunch. So that sort of thing. So it's a visual aid to let the child know what's happening and what to expect. Other visual aids we can use could be around trying to get the child to communicate or understand about their emotions. So you can use a feelings thermometer, so they're able to say whereabouts on the thermometer they're feeling. So at the bottom they feel good, they feel happy, they feel calm. In the middle they're feeling a little bit confused or a little bit more agitated or distressed. And at the top then they know that actually we are, or they're feeling a little bit angry and upset and behaviour is going to happen. On the opposite side of that, we can use cards or numbers. So 1 could represent I'm doing great, and 5 represents that they're struggling to understand the situation or to stay in the room and they're about ready to explode and display some behaviours. Another useful strategy that we can use is preparation or preparing for an event or a situation that is outside the ordinary or outside the normal of what you usually do as a family. So this is being able to sit down with your child and research days out, so printing off maps and photos, planning the route, having a rough timetable of what you're going to do that day, and just generally showing or building up an expectation of what's going to be happening that day. And hopefully as you're preparing and as you're printing off these useful resources, this will help reduce the young person's anxiety. But depending on the child and their need for routine and the need for consistency, making a plan too rigid can make it very difficult to stick to and can cause a lot more anxiety for a child if you find that the plan is too rigid to stick to and something's not going to go as according to the plan, or actually you still need it to be a little bit more flexible. So being able to say, this is what we sort of plan to do today, we could do one activity, or actually we could do another activity, or not setting times and just saying, well, the plan is we'll go here for the morning, we'll have lunch here, and then we'll go there in the afternoon. So there's sort of like a little bit more of a inbuilt flexibility with that, rather than at 8 o'clock we're going to do this, at 10 o'clock we're going to do this, at 12 o'clock we're going to go for lunch, because you might not be able to get a seat at 12 o'clock, if you know what I mean. Another strategy we can use is trying to manage social situations, or to take a little bit more of a control over social situations. So what we can do is use tasks or activities to try and maintain a level of calm within the child. So using collector's cards or books or magazines to promote them stepping outside the comfort zone and taking part in new tasks and activities. We can also sign them up for clubs and groups so they can meet people with similar interests to them, or if there's an unstructured time that you know is going to happen. So at school, if they struggle with break times, then you can ask the teacher to make them into either a fruit monitor or let them help set up the classroom during that unstructured time instead of expecting them to go out and participate in a break which they struggle with. You can also write for common social situations that your child struggles with. You can write scripts so that they know what to say or what to do in these certain situations instead of struggling and standing out. Another useful resource could be social stories. So these are short descriptions of situations, events or activities, and social stories can be used to teach unwritten social rules about what we take as and what we understand as being normal that a child with autism may struggle to pick up on or may struggle to understand. So another useful resource that we can use, especially if the child is going to places like school and clubs and activities, is something called a social passport. So this is a document that has a brief overview of the child. So there'll be the picture of the child and the name, important information, what the likes are, what they don't like, triggers of the behaviour and helpful strategies to manage that behaviour. So it's a bit of a booklet or a passport that has all this information in that you're able to take to different places to give to different individuals that are involved in your child's care, so they have a brief overview of your child and what they like and what they don't like, to be able to manage the situation, to be able to actually communicate a little bit better. Because if you know what the child likes or what their interests are, you're able to start a conversation around that, rather than going through the uncertainty and the anxiety of this person doesn't know me, this person doesn't know what I like, or I like this in a particular way, or however it goes with your particular child. Another useful resource could be comic strip conversations. So these are comic book type strip where it is simple drawings to outline a conversation. So we use these to support the child's understanding of social situations and what is appropriate to say and what isn't appropriate to say. So it helps the child visually work through a challenging situation to identify solutions and strategies to be able to manage that situation better in the future. So it helps the child identify what people say and do as well as what they might be thinking, which sometimes children with autism struggle with. As we know, children and young people avoid demands quite often. So when they do avoid demands, you may often find that they resist these demands due to a lack of confidence. And they may do it because there's a lack of self-esteem or a lack of ability to cope with failure. And they may find the world a very scary place and try to manage this by avoiding demands to stay in control of the situation. And you may also find that actually they're avoiding demands because they fear what will come next. So what would come next, what the outcome would be if they do comply with that demand. So some strategies to help when your child is avoiding demands could be that you can try to be indirect and depersonalised when requesting and setting tasks. You can also try to prioritise the issue that you wish to work on and look at the ones that you can let go and forget about. Try to start each day afresh as well and not carry over yesterday's problems to today, because you'll find that actually that may cause some behaviour. We want to look for any opportunity to give the child some sort of pseudo control or imaginary control that they think that they may be in control of the situation. We want to take time out before the child has reached their tolerance limit. So actually knowing what your child can do and cope with is best with this. And we also want to stay calm and make consequences unemotional. So a few other things that we can try and learn about our children is whether they're sensory seeking or sensory avoiding. So if your child is sensory seeking, you want to try and incorporate activities that allow your child to gain the level of sensory feedback that they require in a safe or socially acceptable way. So sensory seeking behaviour is they may want access to certain materials or certain smells, certain tastes, whether they like deep pressure or no pressure, whether they like to jump up and down, whatever they prefer to do, try and incorporate that activity throughout their day to keep them nice and calm. And we also want to include in their daily timetable, so include these activities within their daily timetable to ensure that their social needs are met. So when our children are sensory avoiding, so obviously your children are avoiding certain things such as loud noises or certain smells or certain feelings of materials, tags on clothes, all that sort of thing. We want to tell our children about the possible sensory stimuli that they may experience in different environments. So if you know, for example, that you go to the shops at a particular time and it's going to be busy, informing your children that actually where you're going could be busy, there could be a lot of people, there could be a lot of noise, and trying to plan for that. So knowing that if there's going to be a lot of noise, can you bring headphones to try and dull that noise down? Can you try and avoid and go a different time, that sort of thing. And we know that there's certain companies such as Morrison's and Cineworld have autism friendly times, so it might be a good thing to look into that and see if you can go during those times to try and avoid overwhelming our children. So modelling is a useful tool to try and teach about emotions. So what modelling does is it helps us as parents use our own experiences to teach about emotions. So when we're feeling a particular emotion, for example anger, we can express that feeling via facial expression, so our children can say that. We can then label that feeling and saying something along the lines of I'm feeling cross or I'm feeling angry. We can then provide a simple reason for that feeling, so I am feeling cross or angry because I got stuck in traffic. And then using a strategy and explicitly reflect on how this helps you to cope. So I am feeling angry or cross because I got stuck in traffic, so therefore I'm going to go for a walk to calm down. This models to your child what a feeling is, how that feeling can be expressed, and what coping strategies we can use to try and manage that emotion as well. Modelling is useful in a way because it helps us vocalise how we can manage emotions. So the example here we've got here is what would happen if we lose our car keys. So you can say it out loud: if I stay calm, I will have a better memory and I will make wise decisions. Think carefully: when did I last have my car keys? Where could I have put them? Is there another solution? And who can help me? So you can vocalise this problem and the solutions to be able to teach your child that actually this is how we can combat an emotion, and this is how we can cope in a situation where actually we're finding it a little bit difficult. So using the life situations around us can help model how we can manage our emotions and think about social situations as well. So the use of TV programmes, or watching family members, or watching people out in public, to try and help your child think about the social situations and the feelings that the other people have. So it could be useful to involve your child in guessing how a person is feeling in a social situation and why they might be feeling that certain way and what actually might help. And eventually this is a way of teaching them how they can apply that to themselves and how they can actually manage a situation themselves and understand how they're feeling and why that might be so. We know children with autism really struggle to pick up on social situations and unexpected or unwritten rules. We know that they may struggle in understanding why we can't consistently and repetitively ask loads of questions, or we can't always talk about our favourite topic of conversation or our favourite interest. And actually they really struggle on picking up social cues and understanding social situations. So therefore a useful strategy we can do is teach them how to do this. So some examples here are shaping a behaviour through setting clear and consistent boundaries. So in response to asking repetitive questions, you can set a boundary where they can only ask that question so many times a day. So for example, 4 times in one day, and that resets every day. What you could do is also have some sort of visual cue to this, so tallying it up or having certain cards or tokens that they can hand over whenever they've asked a question, so they can visually say how many questions they've got left to ask during that day. You can provide feedback to let the young person know when you've heard enough about their interest, their favourite interest, because sometimes you do find that that's basically what they prefer to speak about, and they would speak about that forever and ever. And we can also teach them about the non-verbal cues that we give. So whenever we do give a non-verbal cue, if we find that your child isn't picking that up, you can say, well, I've done this, or my face says this because I'm feeling like I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling fed up, that sort of thing. A useful tool that you and your child could do together is reflecting on problems and behaviour and thinking about solutions on how we can fix it if something similar were to happen again. So remember, it's best to do this after a behaviour, once the child has went through recovery and is back to their baseline phase. So it's about sitting down with your child and looking at what happened, what did they do, what did you do, if something similar happens and again, how can you fix that, what can you do differently, that sort of thing. And this could be useful in terms of helping the child work through what went wrong, how they were feeling, and how actually what they did wasn't acceptable, but what can they do in the future that can communicate to you how they're feeling. Another useful tool that could be helpful is the energy bank account. So this is if going to school costs 40% of their energy, then as a counter to that, they can do something during the day that can give them that energy back. So as you see along the sides, you've got withdrawals. So a withdrawal could be going into crowds, going to the supermarket, being late to school, or doing a lesson that they don't like, that sort of thing. And deposits could be something that they find fun. So getting to do something along their lines of interest. So it could be going on the Xbox, reading a book, having a dance, going out with friends, spending some time watching a film, that sort of thing. So if they have to do something that is extraneous to them, what can you do to help build that energy up? That's that difficult task is taken out of them. The emotional toolbox is again a really useful tool for you and your child, and it's something that you can create together. So within the emotional toolbox, we recommend that there's quite a few different subcategories of activities that you can look at. So you've got physical activities, that is something that helps your child quickly release energy, so going for a run, doing some exercise, take the dog for a walk, that sort of thing. Relaxation tools is something that slowly releases emotional energy and help calm down or help lower the heart rate. So this could be anything from meditation to reading a book to having a bath, that sort of thing. So social tools, so that can be using people or animals to help manage emotions. So having half an hour on a night time before bed, having a cuddle and a chat with parents, or it could be after a behaviour, letting your child have some time with their pets, so a dog or a cat, and being able to stroke the pet just to help them feel a little bit better. So thinking tools, again, this is going back to the reflection, so challenging the thoughts and challenging the behaviour, and reflecting on how we can change that in the future, or what can we do better. And then special interest tools, so it's again going back to thinking about the the energy bank, and thinking about actually if this certain situation is taking a lot out of your child, what can you do to fill them back up again with that energy? So, and how can we keep them nice and calm? So it's being able to know what their special interest is and allow them to have time, because that interest provides them with pleasure, relaxation, and serves as a little bit of an off switch for them as well. So in this section, we're going to cover how you can tell your child about their diagnosis. There are many different resources out there in public or online that could be really useful. So in this slide here, you can find that there are a couple of pictures of some books that could be helpful that you can read, or you can read with your child, that can explain what autism is and what a diagnosis of autism means. So I've just explained some books that could be useful to help explain autism and Asperger's, but here are some books as well about emotions that could be really helpful. So things about explaining anxiety or worry or anger or jealousy, that sort of thing. So these books can be really useful. These are some books for older children or teenagers that could be quite helpful. So how can you tell your child about their diagnosis of autism? So we can personalise it, that child. You can tell your child when they're starting to become a little bit aware of their differences compared to other peers their age. It would be helpful to notice a pattern of their strengths and weaknesses over a long period of time. And then when they are aware of their differences, you can then identify with them that there is a name for that particular pattern of strengths and weaknesses, and that name is autism. We can also ensure that the telling of a diagnosis can go smoothly if it's the person who they're most comfortable with is telling them about this, that it happens in a familiar place, and there's a quite big chunk of time where they can be able to ask questions. And how might they react to that? So how might they react to being told that they have this diagnosis? They might be pleased. So now that they've got a better understanding of themselves, they can go out and research what's helpful and what's not. So knowing that there is a reason for these difficulties and differences can provide a sense of relief, or even provide a sense of identity. Alternatively, they might not be very accepting of the diagnosis and may need some time to digest the information. They also may find that they may be concerned about the health and need reassurance that autism is not a disease and it's not something that anybody can die from, and actually it's just a label that is there to label the patterns of strengths and weaknesses that somebody has. So when speaking about strengths that children with autism may have, you can find that there's quite a long list, but to name a few, they usually have very good attention to detail, they can be quite observant, their ability to absorb and maintain and retain facts is quite, well, fantastic really, they have a very unique thought process, and actually they're quite accepting of differences in others as well, and they are extremely honest and loyal. So to understand autism, we need to understand different areas, or different difficulties that they may have. So getting the gist, they may have difficulty reading situations and adapting behaviour accordingly. They may have difficulty understanding other people's perspectives. You can find that they may display quite challenging behaviour. So we may need to get used to trying to find the reason behind that behaviour and understanding where they are in the arousal curve. They may have difficulty with social and communication skills, which can sometimes be camouflaged. They can be quite good at masking these difficulties. They may have quite a few interests, or they may repeat a lot of things. You may find that they're actually quite strict with routine, but that's just because it makes the world predictable and enjoyable to them. You may find they may have some sensory issues, so they may be over or undersensitive to certain things and environmental stimuli, and you can find that imagination can be a little bit of a struggle for young people with autism because they have difficulty in seeing how things could be. So we've come to the end of the presentation. I'd like to take this time to say thank you for watching both part 1 and part 2. I hope you found them useful and informative. There should be on the website a resource list attached to this workshop that you might find has links to useful websites and other useful things such as the parent support group like Sparks. On our website as well, there is a fair few other useful workshops around autism and anxiety, challenging behaviour, ADHD for example, which you may find useful as well to watch. Thank you very much.